Ragnarok. You've seen it in the movies, you've played it in the games. And if you really think you know what it is, you don't. The version they showed you was sanitized, simplified, stripped of everything that made the original tradition dangerous to know. The real Ragnarok, the one documented in texts that predate every adaptation by 1,000 years, is not a battle between gods and monsters. It is a sequence, a specific, numbered, ordered sequence of events with signs that announce each stage before it arrives. And some of those signs have already happened. The question is not whether Ragnarok is coming. According to the primary sources, that was decided a long time ago. The question is where in the sequence we are right now.
Ragnarok, the sequence has already started.
There is a poem in the poetic Edda called the Völuspá, the prophecy of the seeress, that begins with a dead woman being raised from her grave by Odin himself, so she can tell him something he already knows and cannot stop. The poem is available in full translation through sacred-texts.com and through Jackson Crawford's modern translation, published by Hackett Publishing Company, which is currently the most academically respected English version of the poetic Edda available. The Völuspá dates to approximately 1000 CE, though the mythology it preserves is significantly older, and it contains the most complete account of Ragnarok in the entire Norse tradition. What Odin asks the dead woman to tell him is the future, not because he does not know it, he knows it. He has known it since he sacrificed his eye at the well of Mimir to gain wisdom, since he hung himself on Yggdrasil for 9 days to understand the runes, since he sought out every source of knowledge in the 9 worlds and found that every source told him the same thing. The future is fixed, the sequence is set, and it ends with him being swallowed by a wolf. He asks the dead woman anyway, because the Norse theological tradition preserved something that most mythological traditions avoided: the idea that knowing the end does not change the end, and that courage in the face of inevitable destruction is not diminished by the inevitability. Odin does not seek the prophecy to escape it, he seeks it to understand it completely. And the understanding is what this video is about, not the Marvel version, not the God of War version, not Wagner's Gylfaginning, which introduced the phrase Twilight of the Gods to the popular imagination and has been contaminating popular understanding of Ragnarok ever since. The primary sources: the Völuspá, the Gylfaginning of Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda, available through sacred-texts.com, the Vafþrúðnismál, the texts that the Vikings actually preserved and that contain a sequence of events specific enough, internally consistent enough, and in several cases archaeologically and historically grounded enough that dismissing them as simple mythology requires more certainty than the evidence supports. 6 aspects of the Ragnarok tradition, starting with the word itself, because the word is wrong in every popular version. And getting the word wrong means getting the entire tradition wrong from the beginning.
Part 1. The word nobody translates correctly.
Twilight of the Gods is not a translation of Ragnarok, it is a German invention. Richard Wagner used Georgmyrun, meaning Twilight of the Gods, as the title of the final opera in his Ring cycle, premiered in 1876. The phrase was dramatic, poetic, and perfectly suited to Romantic-era operatic aesthetics. It spread into popular culture and became the default way English speakers understood the Norse concept of the end of the world. The problem is that it is not what the Old Norse actually says. The word Ragnarok in Old Norse is most accurately parsed as 2 components: regin, meaning the powers, the ruling forces, the divine authorities, and rock, meaning fate, origin, reason, or doom. The compound therefore means the fate of the powers or the doom of the ruling forces, not twilight, not a gradual darkening toward night, a doom, a sentence that has been passed and will be carried out. This distinction is not merely semantic. It changes the entire emotional and theological register of the tradition. A twilight is passive. It happens to the gods regardless of what they do, and its primary quality is beauty, the specific melancholy beauty of something ending. A doom is active. It is a judgment. It implies agency, consequence, and the specific weight of events that could not have ended differently because of choices that were made long before the ending arrived. The scholar John Lindow, In Norse Mythology, A Guide to God's Heroes. Rituals and Beliefs, published by Oxford University Press and available through archive.org, documents how the mistranslation entered the scholarly tradition through the influence of Wagner's opera and the Romantic Kira German reception of Norse mythology. Lindo notes that the word rock appears in other Old Norse contexts with the consistent meaning of fate or cosmic order, never with any meaning related to light or darkness. The Twilight reading was a folk etymology, a later interpretation that sounded plausible because the Old Norse words for twilight and fate were similar enough in pronunciation to be confused after the language had changed. What this means for the tradition is significant. The Norse did not understand Ragnarok as a beautiful ending. They understood it as an inevitable consequence. The gods did not look at their own destruction with melancholy and acceptance. They looked at it with the specific quality of beings who know that what is coming is the result of a sequence of events that began long before they could have intervened, and who have decided that the only response available to them is to fight when the time comes and fight as well as possible. Odin's entire project, the accumulation of knowledge, the sacrifice of his eye, the 9 days on Yggdrasil, the armies of Einherjar gathered in Valhalla, is not acceptance of the doom. It is preparation for it. The distinction between a culture that calls the end of the world a twilight and a culture that calls it a doom is the distinction between a culture that makes peace with its ending and a culture that decides to meet its ending armed. The Vikings chose the second option, and the word they used for their choice reflects that.
Part 2. Baldr's death, the sign that happened already.
Ragnarok does not begin with a battle. Every popular adaptation begins with the battle. The armies of Asgard against the armies of Muspelheim and Jotunheim, the gods fighting the giants on the plain of Vigrid, Odin swallowed by Fenrir, Thor killing the Midgard serpent and dying from its venom 9 steps later. That sequence is real. It is in the Völuspá and the Gylfaginning, and it happens exactly as described, but it is not where Ragnarok begins. Ragnarok begins with the death of Baldr. Baldr is the son of Odin, described in both the prose Edda and the poetic Edda as the most beloved of the gods, beautiful, wise, and universally admired across all 9 worlds. His death is the first event in the Ragnarok sequence, and the primary sources are explicit that once Baldr falls, the process cannot be reversed. The machinery of doom begins turning at the moment. Baldr dies and it does not stop. The story of how Baldr dies is documented in detail in the Gylfaginning, chapters 49 through 50, available through sacred-texts.com. Baldr begins having dreams of his own death. The dreams are so disturbing that the gods convene to address them. His mother Frigg travels through all 9 worlds and extracts an oath from every being and every object stone. Metal, wood, fire, water, disease, all animals, all plants, that none of them will harm Baldr. The oath-taking is comprehensive enough that Baldr becomes effectively invulnerable. The gods celebrate this by throwing objects at him during feasts. Everything bounces off. Nothing can touch him. Frigg missed one thing. She did not ask the mistletoe. The sources differ on why. In some versions, the mistletoe was too young and small to seem worth asking. In others, Frigg considered it too weak to pose any threat. Loki discovers this omission. He shapes a dart from mistletoe and brings it to the game where the gods are throwing things at the invulnerable Baldr. He guides the hand of Baldr's blind brother Hogger in throwing it. The mistletoe penetrates what everything else could not. Baldr falls. The prose Edda records the response of the gods with a specific phrase that deserves attention. It says that the gods stood in silence. Not grief, silence. Because they understood what the death of Baldr meant. They could not speak what they understood. And what they understood was that the first event in the sequence had just occurred and nothing they could do would reverse it. The attempt to reverse it is documented and it fails. The god Hermod rides to Hel on Odin's horse, Sleipnir, to negotiate Baldr's return. Hel agrees on one condition, that every being in the 9 worlds weeps for Baldr. Every being does weep, except one. A giantess named Tok, widely understood in the tradition to be Loki in disguise, refuses to weep. She says Baldr brought her no joy while he lived, and she will let Hel keep him. The condition is not met. Baldr remains in Hel until after Ragnarok, when he returns as one of the surviving gods in the New World. The scholar Hilda Ellis Davidson in Gods and Myths of Northern Europe, published by Penguin and available through academic libraries, argues that the death of Baldr functions in the Norse tradition as what she calls the point of no return, the moment after which the divine order's trajectory is fixed. Everything before Baldr's death is the accumulated cause. Everything after it is the unfolding consequence, and the consequence is documented with a precision that the popular tradition has consistently chosen to simplify rather than preserve.
Part 3, Fimbulwinter, and the 3 years without summer.
The first physical sign of Ragnarok is not a monster breaking free or a god dying, it is whether Fimbulwinter from the Old Norse Fimbul, meaning great or mighty, and Vetter meaning winter is described in the Gylfaginning with specific and disturbing clarity. 3 winters will come in succession with no summer between them. Snow will fall from all directions. Frost will be severe. Wind will be bitter. The sun will give no warmth. This is not metaphorical. The prose Edda is describing a literal climatic event, 3 consecutive winters without the agricultural cycle that sustained Norse civilization, and what follows from those 3 winters is described with equal specificity in the Völuspá and the Gylfaginning. Over all the world there shall be mighty battles, brothers shall slay each other for greed's sake. No man shall spare father or son. The specific phrase the Völuspá uses is axe age, sword age, wind age, wolf age, before the world goes down. An age of axes and swords, an age of wind, an age of wolves. The social contract of the Norse world built on loyalty, kinship, honor, and the specific obligations that bound individuals to families and families to communities, collapses under the pressure of starvation and cold. Not because people become evil, because the conditions that made the social contract viable cease to exist. 3 winters without summer means 3 years without harvest. 3 years without harvest in an agricultural society means the systematic destruction of every structure that depends on surplus, and what remains when surplus disappears is the specific violence of scarcity, brother against brother, father against son, every code that held civilization together breaking under a weight it was never designed to bear. The scholar Bo Gergsland of Uppsala University has documented a remarkable parallel in his 2008 paper published in the journal Futhark, the scholarly journal of runic studies available through academic databases. Gergsland argues that the Fimbulwinter tradition may preserve a cultural memory of the extreme weather event of 536 CE when a volcanic eruption, now identified as originating in Iceland or possibly North America, caused a dust veil that blocked sunlight across the northern hemisphere for approximately 18 months. Tree ring records from Scandinavia show the most severe growth suppression in the past 2,000 years, occurring in 536 to 537 CE. Contemporary Byzantine and Chinese sources document crop failures, famine, and social collapse across the northern hemisphere in the same period. The Norse people living through that event would have experienced something that matched the Fimbulwinter tradition precisely, a catastrophic failure of the agricultural cycle accompanied by the social breakdown that follows from it. Whether the tradition records that specific event or whether the 536 event simply confirmed a pre-existing mythological expectation is a question the evidence cannot resolve definitively. What the evidence does establish is that the Fimbulwinter is not an arbitrary invention. It describes a type of event that actually occurs, and that the Norse tradition understood as the signal that the final sequence had begun. After Fimbulwinter, according to the primary sources, come the astronomical signs. The wolves, Skoll and Hati, who have chased the sun and moon through the sky since the beginning of time, finally catch their prey. Skoll devours the sun, Hati devours the moon. The stars fall from the sky, the world goes dark, and then the chains begin to break.
Part 4. The chains are about to break.
3 things are imprisoned in the Norse cosmos. 3 things will break free. And the primary sources describe each imprisonment, each chain, and each liberation with a specificity that goes far beyond what any popular version has preserved. The first is Fenrir, the wolf, who is the son of Loki, and the giantess Angrboda, documented in the Gylfaginning chapters 25 and 34, available through sacred-texts.com. Fenrir was raised among the gods until he grew large enough that only Odin dared feed him. The gods decided he needed to be bound, but had a theological problem. The sacred places of the gods could not be defiled with Fenrir's blood, which meant they could not simply kill him, even though the prophecies were explicit that he would eventually kill Odin. So they bound him instead with a magical ribbon called Gleipnir, forged by the dwarves from 6 impossible things: the sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. The ribbon looks like silk. It holds like nothing in the 9 worlds has ever held. And Fenrir will remain bound until Ragnarok, when the ribbon breaks and he runs with his mouth open so wide that his upper jaw scrapes the sky and his lower jaw scrapes the earth. The second is Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, also the child of Loki and Angrboda, cast into the ocean that surrounds Midgard where it grew until it encircled the entire world and bit its own tail. Thor and Jormungandr are destined opponents. They have met twice before Ragnarok, and neither encounter ended in death. At Ragnarok, the serpent will release its tail and rise from the ocean, poisoning the air and churning the sea as it comes ashore to fight. The third is Loki himself. After engineering Baldr's death and preventing his return from Hel, Loki was captured and bound beneath the earth with the entrails of his own son. Documented in the Lokasenna and the Gylfaginning, a serpent was placed above him, dripping venom onto his face. His wife Sigyn holds a bowl to catch the venom, but must empty it periodically. And in the moments when she is gone, the venom falls and Loki writhes in pain, which the Norse understood as the cause of earthquakes. He remains bound until Ragnarok. When the earthquakes intensify, the chains break, and Loki steers the ship Naglfar, made from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, from the realm of Hel toward the plane of Vig. What makes this triple imprisonment theologically significant is the choice that preceded it. The gods knew the prophecies. They knew what each of these 3 would do at Ragnarok. They had the opportunity to kill all 3 before they became threats. They chose not to. They chose imprisonment over killing, because killing would have defiled sacred spaces, because killing might have been wrong, because the prophecy was fixed and killing might not have changed it anyway. And now they have 3 bound enemies who are getting stronger while the bonds hold, and who will be perfectly intact when the bonds break. The Norse theological tradition preserved this dilemma without resolving it. The gods made a choice. The choice was arguably wrong, and the consequences of the wrong choice will unfold at Ragnarok with mathematical precision, exactly as the prophecies said they would. Exactly as the gods knew they would when they made the choice that set everything in motion.
Part 5. The Battle and its Characters.
The Völuspá names every individual combat of Ragnarok, not the battle as a whole, the individual matchups, who fights whom, who wins, who dies. And in each case, the outcome is not arbitrary. The logic of each result follows from everything that preceded it, with the specific inevitability of a sequence that was always going to end this way. Odin fights Fenrir. Odin is the most powerful of the gods, the Allfather, the god who sacrificed his eye for wisdom and hung on Yggdrasil for 9 days, for knowledge, and spent an eternity preparing for this moment with the armies of Valhalla behind him. Fenrir swallows him whole. Odin's son Vidar then kills Fenrir either by stepping on the wolf's lower jaw and tearing it apart with his hands, or by driving a sword through the wolf's palate. The sources differ on the mechanism, they agree on the outcome. Odin dies, his son avenges him. The wolf dies second. Thor fights Jormungandr. Thor kills the serpent with his hammer Mjolnir, then he takes 9 steps and falls, killed by the venom the dying serpent exhaled. 9 steps exactly. The Völuspá is specific about the number. Thor kills the thing that kills him and dies within seconds of his victory. Freyr fights Surtur, the lord of Muspelheim, who comes from the south with a sword that blazes brighter than the sun. Freyr has no sword. He gave his sword away to win the love of the giantess Gerd, a detail documented in the Völuspá poem, and now faces the most powerful fire giant in existence with no weapon. He fights with a deer antler and loses. The detail of the missing sword is not a narrative convenience. It is a documented consequence of a specific earlier choice with a specific later cost. Freyr chose love over the sword that would have saved him. The tradition preserved both the choice and the cost without comment. Heimdall and Loki kill each other. Tyr and the Houndgarm kill each other. The specific pairings communicate something the Battle Spectacle version cannot. These are not random matchups. Each pairing reflects a relationship, a history, an opposition that has existed since before the battle began. Loki and Heimdall are eternal opposites, chaos and order, deception and clarity. The Boundary Crosser and the Boundary Guardian, their mutual destruction is not a battle outcome. It is a resolution. After the battle, Surtur sets fire to the world. The Völuspá describes it as flames playing against the sky. The earth sinks into the sea, the mountains fall, the stars fall from their positions. Everything that exists burns or drowns. And then the poem does something that no popular adaptation prepared its audience for. It continues.
Part 6. What comes next, and what everyone forgets.
Ragnarok is not an ending. The Völuspá does not stop at the destruction. After the earth sinks into the sea, after the fires of Surtur consume what the water did not, after every divine and human structure that existed is gone, the poem describes what comes next, and what comes next is not darkness, it is morning. The earth rises again from the sea, green and fertile. The waterfalls run, eagles fly over mountains catching fish. The grain grows without being planted. The surviving gods find each other on the plain where Asgard once stood, and sit in the grass and talk about the things that happened and the things they remember. Baldr returns from hell. Hador, who threw the mistletoe dart, returns with him. The brothers who caused the first event in the sequence return together into a world rebuilt from the destruction their actions helped cause. To humans survive? Their names are Leif and Lifthrasir, life and eager for life, and they hid in the wood of Hodmimir during Fimbulwinter, and the burning and the flooding, sustained by morning dew when all other food was gone. From them, the new human race descends. A new sun rises, the daughter of the old sun, already born before her mother was devoured, already moving through the sky before anyone knew she would be needed. The scholar Rudolf Simek in Dictionary of Northern Mythology, published by D. Brewer and considered one of the standard academic references for Norse religion available through academic libraries, argues that the post-Ragnarok renewal is not a Christian interpolation, added by Snorri Sturluson to make the Norse tradition more palatable to his Christian audience, an argument some scholars have made. Simek points to the Völuspá itself, which predates Snorri and contains the renewal narrative independently. The cyclical structure of creation, destruction, and renewal appears in the primary sources without Christian mediation. What the cyclical structure means theologically is the most unsettling aspect of the entire tradition, and the one that the popular version has never fully processed. If the world has been destroyed and rebuilt before, then the world we inhabit is not the original world. It is the rebuilt one. The surviving gods meeting in the grass after Ragnarok are meeting in a world that is already a second attempt, and nothing in the primary sources says that the second attempt is the last one. The Vafþrúðnismál, one of the poems of the Poetic Edda, available through say.com, records a conversation between Odin and the giant Vafthrúðnir, in which Odin asks about the world after Ragnarok and receives answers about Leif and Lifthrasir, about Vidar and Vali, about the world that comes after the world that ends. But Odin also asks something else. He asks what Odin himself whispered in Baldr's ear before Baldr's funeral pyre was set alight. The giant cannot answer. Nobody can answer. It is the one thing Odin knows that nobody else knows, and the tradition preserves its unknowability without apology. The whispered secret is the gap at the center of the Ragnarok tradition. The sequence is documented. The signs are listed. The combats are named. The renewal is described. And then there is the one thing Odin knew that he chose not to share with anyone, not with the dead Cirrus who could see everything, not with the giant who knew the fate of every world, not with anyone in any of the 9 worlds who preserved his mythology for 1,000 years. Whatever Odin whispered to his dead son on the funeral pyre, he decided the rest of the tradition did not need to know it. And the tradition, to its credit, accepted that decision. It preserved the question. It left the answer blank. And it has been waiting there in the primary sources, the Codex Regius, sacred-texts.com, Jackson Crawford's translation. Every edition of the Poetic Edda that has ever been printed for someone to ask the right question. Not what Ragnarok is, that is documented. Not when Ragnarok comes, that depends on the signs and the signs are listed. But what Odin knew that he chose not to tell anyone, That question has no answer in the primary sources, which means it has no answer anywhere, which means it remains exactly where Odin placed it in the silence between what the tradition preserved and what it chose to keep secret. That silence is the most Norse thing in the entire tradition, and it has been there the whole time.
Epilogue: 6 aspects of Ragnarok.
6 aspects of Ragnarok. 6 things the popular version either simplified, mistranslated, or omitted entirely. The word that does not mean Twilight, the death that started everything before the battle began, the winter that archaeology suggests may have already happened once, the 3 imprisoned things that will break free exactly when the tradition says they will, the individual combats that follow the logic of choices made long before the fighting started, and the renewal that nobody mentions, the world that rises after the world that burns, green and fertile, with a new sun already in the sky before the old one was swallowed. Ragnarok is not the end of everything, it is the end of this, and the Norse tradition, which called its ending a doom rather than a twilight, preserved that distinction with a precision that the popular version has been smoothing over for 150 years. The Völuspá is still there. The Gylfaginning is still there. Jackson Crawford's translation is available today. The Codex Regius, the manuscript that preserved the poetic EDA, is digitized and publicly accessible through the Arna Institute in Copenhagen. Everything the tradition preserved is still there. The sequence is documented. The signs are listed. The question Odin whispered is still blank. And the world, as far as anyone can tell from the primary sources, is still turning. If you like the video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and follow for more.